I pray that prayer help us to slow down and breathe and hear this story anew. Um, like many of the prayers I pray because I need it as much as anyone. I pray it before I stand up here and tell you, okay, here comes all the things, because all the things are a lot of things. And these are just all the church things. And if your calendar looks like mine, like the white spaces on the calendar are an endangered species in the month of December already. Or you're like having to decide, okay, who do we love most? Which people are we going to see, and which people are we going to be like, I'm sorry, we love you less. We're not going to see you this season. So everything I'm getting ready to tell you is at palchurch.com, palchurch.com/Advent 2024. You don't have to remember all this, but just like I give this to you as a blessing and as a take a deep breath and be here. Our choir, who will sing in just a few minutes at the end of this morning's worship service, has their Christmas cantata next Sunday on December 8th over in the traditional sanctuary at 4 o'clock. 2 weeks from today, right here in this space, we're going to do an Appalachian Christmas Sunday. That means that this amazing band, who's not up here anymore, but this amazing band back here, all these same faces, but instead you're going to hear banjo and dobro, and I think Sterling is playing something called a ukulele banjo, which I'm sure I'm not saying that right, but it's a thing apparently. It's a fiddle, all of that good stuff is all going to be here. Every time I've told someone about this, they've said, can I wear overalls? And I've always said, I have no power, clearly, to control what you wear in this church. So, Appalachian Christmas Sunday on December 15th here in this space. Then our old friend Ugly Sweater Christmas Sunday will be here on December 22nd. That will be right after the Vols win or lose a playoff game. So either come and celebrate or come and be distracted. Either way, going to be great. Going to be a great morning for all that. We will also have service of the longest night on the Thursday before Christmas, which I believe is the 19th from our Recovery at Powell friends. Christmas Eve will still be right here in this room, same as usual at 5 o'clock. Last year, Christmas Eve was on a Sunday, and because it was on a Sunday, we were trying to figure out how to do something different in the morning, and so we did a traditional worship service over in the sanctuary, and it was amazing. And we didn't really turn people away, but we probably should have if the fire marshal was in the building. So we want to do that again, even though Christmas Eve is not on a Sunday this year. We want to do that again. And we asked for your help in our newsletter this week to say, this will all just same as always in here at 5 o'clock. But in addition, we want to do a traditional service over there. And we asked for your help in the newsletter this week of what time, what works best for you and your family. Is it 10 o'clock? Is it noon? Is it 3 o'clock? We put that in the newsletter this week, and this morning, every one of those responses had the exact same number of votes. So, thanks not at all for your help with that. If you're like, oh, I didn't know about this, and you want to come on Christmas Eve, and you have a strong opinion between 10, noon, and 3, go to palchurch.com, go to our newsletter, help vote in that. We want to be able to tell you next week what time that service is going to be. And then again, right here, 5 o'clock, candlelight communion in this room, all of that good stuff. That's all the things, palchurch.com/Advent 2024. That's all the things, and it can feel like a sprint. It can feel exhausting. It can feel all of this stuff. And what I find, especially working in churches during this season, is the closer that we get to Christmas, the generally sillier that I get, because I don't have the mechanism. In our house, when our kids have stayed up too late, we call it, they've gone to the silly place. And like, this is December 1st, and I'm like approaching it rapidly. The closer we get to Christmas, if you have a really stupid joke, like a really terrible joke, I may not think it's funny today, but I promise if you tell it to me on like December 21st, I will think it's the greatest thing that's ever lived. So please hold your terrible jokes maybe a week or two. But I just increasingly, as I get stressed and as I get closer to all that, I just find all of that stuff deeply, deeply amusing. And it presents itself in really kind of strange and specific kinds of ways in my life. Sometimes when I'm having a rough day, I will YouTube church fails, just because it helps me in part. When we have a fail, it helps me watch other people fail to say, oh, we're in this together. But I love a good church fail, a good musician hit the wrong note, or, that sort of stuff. I deeply love that. But I also have a really specific bent, toward the Arby's "We Have the Meats" commercials. I think that if I'm being honest, I think those commercials are funny all year long. But the closer it gets to Christmas, the more I just like those. That's just my wheelhouse right there. Is the Arby's "We Have the Meats" commercials, and I don't even like. I can't tell you the last time I've been to Arby's. I'm not. I'm a big guy, but I got this through Chick-fil-A and not Arby's, as the Lord intended. And so, like, I don't even. It's the advertising isn't even working on me the way they want it to work. I just deeply enjoy them very much. And so, if you find yourself in a stressful place or a silly place or whatever, just know that you're not alone. And we seek to do all of these things that we can do together at Powell Church. At Powell Church, we're walking through the series on Bethlehem, and I do make that joke about Arby's for a reason, to say Bethlehem is a real place, a real story, and a real history. Everybody starts from somewhere, and Jesus is no exception. And just like Jesus, the places you start from, the places I start from, in some way impact our story. They give it character, they give it color, they give it all of these different things. Bethlehem shows up 8 times in the New Testament, in the Joseph and Mary stories in Matthew and in Luke. But Bethlehem shows up more than 50 times in the Old Testament. This is not a random place. And God is not a random God. This little town is chosen for a reason, and the story of this place is told throughout the entire story of Scripture. And so we're going to walk through some of these things in this season, in part to help us hear an old story with some fresh ears, in part because this town is a really interesting place, right down to the name of the city. Bethlehem, some people think, means house of bread, which can tie into Jesus in ways in which we'll celebrate this morning. But in Arabic, Bethlehem means house of meat. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, right? Yeah, okay. I'm so glad. I was so terrified that people were going to be like, we've never seen those commercials before. What are you talking about? It's good. I'm glad to know we're watching the same channels, right? So think about these two ideas, okay? You've got, as we heard in the reading, this is a contested space. Right now, in real life, it is a real and serious and contested space. And even going all the way back to its name. In Hebrew, you've got house of bread. In Arabic, you've got house of meat. Two things that sound like they are opposed to each other, right? Do you want to go to Panera or do you want to go to Arby's, right? It's like these two things sound like that they are not in agreement at all. And when you look at the terrain, I've never been to Bethlehem, but when you look at the terrain, it does seem more conducive to flocks and herds than wheat and grain. But the truth is, even though those two ideas may sound like they don't work together at all, is it either house of bread or is it house of meat? I don't know about you, but I actually think meat and bread go really well together. Yeah? It may seem at first like it's contradictory or that they are competing with each other. But this is a place where things that may seem that way at first actually can go together nicely. This series is based on this book, Bethlehem, An Advent Journey. This is written by my buddy Dave Graybeal. Dave and I were on staff together at a church in Athens, Tennessee. Dave's not just one of the smartest pastors. Dave's one of the smartest human beings that I know. We had a spelling bee team in Athens, Tennessee. The local Kiwanis Club ran a spelling bee for charity. And me and Dave and another pastor were on it every year, and we won 3 years in a row. You know what my job was in the spelling bee? Dave would say, I think it's this. And I would say, looks great. Let's do it. And then talk trash to the other team. That was my job. So I don't know if I'm selling Dave any books by saying he was a 3-time spelling bee champion. But Dave's one of my closest friends in ministry, an incredibly smart guy. I'll put a link to this. If you're looking for an Advent devotional, something to read between now and December 24th, it's a great book. It's a deep honor of mine to be part of the conversations leading up to this book and then to get to share this material with you here this morning. Bethlehem shows up throughout the whole narrative as this place where maybe contradictory ideas, in fact, might go together better than we give them credit for. Here's the first place Bethlehem shows up, and it's not an easy story. This is Genesis 35. Then the they here is Jacob and his family. So Jacob, if you're familiar with Genesis in the Old Testament, Jacob, they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth. Rachel is Jacob's second wife. He met her and he loved her instantly and wanted to be with her and worked for her father for 7 years. And then they got married, but then the wedding night, the father went surprise and gave Jacob her older sister Leah instead, which is confusing and a sermon for a different day, perhaps. But so deep was his love for Rachel that he worked another 7 years just to have the chance to marry her. So he is married to 2 sisters, but really desperately kind of only wants to be married to the one. Which then in the story creates this scenario where Rachel cannot conceive, but Leah does. And all these children start being born that will eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. If you know that story in Genesis, where Leah has 4 sons, and then Rachel is so desperate, she offers her handmaiden to Jacob, who agrees, and then she has a child, and then Leah offers her handmaiden, and they have a child. If you've never heard this story before, the Bible is wild sometimes. So all of that to say, when we've reached this point in the story, this family, Jacob, has 11 sons and a daughter. And Rachel finally was able to conceive and had a son named Joseph, which is where a lot of the narrative is going to go from here. Joseph, because he is the firstborn son of the woman Jacob really loved, he's really disliked by his older brothers. They will eventually throw him in a well and sell him off to slavery. He'll get an amazing coat, all that good stuff, right? The narrative is going to follow Joseph, and Jesus is from the tribe of Judah, who's one of Leah's boys. But here, at the first instance of Bethlehem, we're going to meet their youngest son. Because Rachel was in childbirth and she had hard labor. When she was in her hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, you have another son." But as her soul was departing, she died. She named the boy Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar at her grave. It's the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is still there to this day. The story's going to follow Joseph. Jesus is going to trace lineage back through Judah. But the first time Bethlehem shows up is this really hard story where Rachel dies in childbirth, producing the last son, essentially the last of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Bible, in case it's not abundantly clear from the story of Jacob and Leah and Rachel, the Bible's no fairy tale, man. And the Bible introduces hard things regularly, which part, I think, is what makes it so meaningful to us. Because my life introduces hard things regularly, and I bet yours does too. So here, the story of Bethlehem begins as this place where Rachel died. The one he really loved died giving birth to her second, his 12th son. So she names him Ben-Oni, which means son of sorrow. Now remember, these aren't just any boys. These are what will become the 12 tribes of Israel. These boys create the family tree that all of these Israelites, when they're in slavery and then when they're into the promised land and all these things, their connection to these 12 boys on the family tree is going to be vital. Because the story, the way we tell it, right, is ours is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And after that, it spreads deep into these 12 branches. So these are important boys. These are important names. And if you read back through Genesis 29 through 35, you can find in each one of these stories when a child is named, they're given this meaningful kind of thing. I called him this because of that. Now, we're not told specifically in the text about these two translations. We're just told Rachel wanted to call him Ben-Oni, but Jacob calls him Benjamin. Why does he change her name? Why does he change his name? And the answer is, I don't know. We can speculate. We could say that maybe he didn't, if she named him Son of Sorrow as she was dying, maybe he didn't want to live with that. Maybe he didn't want him to live with that. I don't know. In the midst of very, very, very hard things, I'm not sure that we're ever really sure why exactly we do anything. Maybe we're just doing the best we can. But she calls him Ben-Oni, which means son of sorrow, but he changes it and or starts calling him Benjamin, which means son of the right hand. These two things also look like they do not go together, right? Son of sorrow, again, if you're going to speculate, the most likely scenario of why he changed his name would be that I don't want to be reminded of that. I don't want to grow up with this. I don't want him to grow up with this. Let's call him the son of the right hand because that is something strong and mighty and appropriate and worthy of a tribe of Israel and all of these kinds of things. But I would submit to you that just like Bethlehem, just like a place where the desert and the farmland meet, just like the house of bread and the house of meat, these two things, even though they appear contradictory at first, probably go together better than we think. Because where all this is headed, where all this is headed is there. And we know Jesus is a son of sorrow. Jesus carries all of it, all of us, to the cross. That's where this story in December is always going in the springtime. Thanks be to God, it doesn't end there. Jesus simultaneously is a son of sorrow and is also the son of the right hand. His ability, his capacity, his very nature in carrying sorrows, carrying sins, being rejected, all of that is him. And simultaneously, none of it stops him from being the son of the right hand. None of it. He, in fact, in his fullness, is both of these things. And what we do here this time of year is hope and love and joy and peace. It's what each one of those candles represents. And we do this because, in part, we believe, Christians have always believed, that those four things, hope, love, joy, and peace, is what this time of year is about. It's what Linus would tell us, right? This is what Christmas is all about. But I would also submit to you that there's something in particular about hope, which is the first of these stories. All of them, hope, love, joy, and peace, are ideas that the New Testament seeks to communicate well. It's why we're still talking about them here today. They're all things that the Gospels communicate, and then the rest of the New Testament communicates even more. The Gospels are about half of the New Testament, then the rest of the New Testament, everything written after the resurrection. It's about a 50-50 split between the Gospels and the rest. But the rest of it all communicates these things more often. For instance, love shows up 66 times in the Gospels and then shows up 162 times in the rest of the New Testament. Peace shows up 23 times in the Gospels and then 68 times in the rest of the New Testament. There's this sense that because of what's happened, things are now even more so this way. Joy is about the same, 26 times in the Gospels, 34 times in the rest of the New Testament. But hope only shows up 3 times in the Gospels. And one of them is Jesus saying, you're putting your hope in the wrong things. Only 3 times in the Gospels. It's not unique to the Gospels. It's true for all that story, that the Roman Empire and persecution and children in Bethlehem being murdered and all of these things. It is a hard and difficult time, the likes of which we probably cannot reckon with fully. It's a time in which hope can be scarce. And so only 3 times in the Gospels is the Greek word for hope used. But it shows up 72 times in the rest of the New Testament. And what I believe about that is that these folks had this grasp, this idea of what has taken place in the manger and then what is taking place here, what takes place in an empty tomb. That is our hope. That because of crucifixion and because of resurrection, because of Jesus, that's our hope. Not just dead but buried, not just risen but alive, not just in us, through us. Resurrection causes hope more than anything else. Resurrection causes hope to multiply. And we still invite each other to embrace it today. To be hopeful is not to be what I would call unnecessarily optimistic. It's not to pretend, because we have no use for pretend. Hope is carrying our sorrows and believing that we have one who knows it well, who has walked this road before us, who has carried it all for us, and has come to set us. Hope is carrying our own sorrows in a belief that the Son of the right hand hasn't just set us free, he knows what it's like. He knows us. Hope is an invitation not to pretend that hard things haven't happened or aren't happening, whether that's in Bethlehem today or all over this world or all over our lives. Hope is a belief not to pretend that that doesn't happen, but to hold those things and also hold our hope in the Son of the right hand. And so we're going to invite you to come this morning to this table where, as is always the case in worship, the invitation is to bring yourself. Not just your stuff, not just your burdens, not just your blessings, not just your gifts, none of that. You bring you. And if you today are not feeling also hopeful, or if you don't know how you feel, or if you came here to get away from your family, whatever your sorrows, he knows what it's like. Being a son of sorrow doesn't stop him from being the son of the right hand. In fact, it all works in there together. This God who's done it all to set us free, and now he invites us to come this morning. So as we enter into this season together with all its busyness and all of this and all of its, you've heard this a million times and I've heard it and all that stuff. We start at this table. We'll end at this table 23 days from now. And then, and now, you bring you. Trust that he knows. And trust that he's here.